Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR, and I'm George Binns. And this is part 2 of our discussion of what's going on in the middle school in Beverly. And joining us still again is the Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Flaherty.
Hello.
And the principal of the middle school,
Good evening.
Lisa Oliver, and I'll get it right this time, it's Ray Donlin. Anyway, hey, Ray Hanlon, I did it again. I got to read my own notes. Anyway, I got a short memory. So we've thrashed at what's been going on in the middle school on a generic basis, and it's a lot different than what I was used to and what a lot of people think of a middle school as, or junior high school, I guess you go way back. And I know in case you're thinking of when I went in the Army, I didn't have a choice of blue or gray uniforms. But one of the big things that was really pushed in the development of the middle school physically and I guess technically is I want to get into STEM or STEAM, and which is the reason we're here today, I think, that I'm still somewhat confused as to how does this all fit together, because as I started to say in the last episode, I'm used to a specific class, 45 minutes, as you said, of one subject, and then you go on to another subject, and you only get one science, and you only get one math in each grade. And yeah, in some of the schools you had a shop class where you go play with your toys and make something. Everybody made a stool. That was the classic.
I made a corner shelf.
Yeah. Oh, you went to an advanced school. And, okay, you made something. Or the girls went off to a home ec kind of class, made cookies. And that was the way it was. That's the hands-on learning. Now we're getting into a lot more stuff. And you've been talking about 3D printing and robotics, and I don't know what else you got going in your shop.
Well, the way that I think about it is that nothing in terms of personal interests are black and white. There's lots of shades of gray, whether it's us or the students that are forming their identities right now. And I mean, math is very black and white, as is science. You develop knowledge and you either end up with something that's true or false. But with STEM, it's a process of design, and it's very like you're learning to become better, and everyone's learning whether the process of whether robotic design is how can it become better, or how can, if you work with Legos and you're building some sort of structure, how can that become a better structure versus the one before? But there are also a mixture and blends of things, as Dot said before. There are opportunities to collaborate that just are still out there. Like, for example, ELA has a place in STEM. Reflection is very much a part of STEM because reflection is part of this whole engineering design process where how do you reflect, how do you become better at STEM or design unless you really think about what you're doing and write about it. Social studies has a part of STEM, which is this real-world application of engineering in the way that how do we understand how to become socially responsible if we don't understand our previous decisions and that ours isn't maybe an original design. Math is important to STEM because there are mathematical implications and how you measure things, and also science, like proving something is right or wrong or true or false, and taking it through that process. So STEM is like the real world arena of all of everything coming together, and so there's opportunities for everything to like come together within STEM, and that's why it's not, learning is messy, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think one thing is, when we were back in school and it was siloed individual subjects, right? Some students excel at that, right? They want to go in, they want to be the student that sits and takes notes, and then they study and they do really well on the test. And they can listen to the teacher and get all of that information. But we also have students that are visual learners and kinesthetic learners, which means they need to get up and do and see. And so now they're going to take some of the information that they're learning in their other classes and be able to get messy, as you said, right?
Yeah.
Touch it, feel it, work it, manipulate it. And then that helps them to learn the other information as well. And I think even today, earlier, when we were waiting, we were talking about technical writing, right? That English used to just be seen as that's where you learn to write, and you didn't worry about that in other subjects. Well, now we know that writing goes across all content areas, and you could build something that's really great, but if you can't communicate that out or draw in the plans or write the directions as to how you accomplished it, it's not going to go anywhere because nobody else can get value from what you've done.
Well, you started to talk a little bit about this breadth of information that's tied in, and had a previous discussion with the superintendent, and one of the buzzwords that she kept pushing was culturally relevant teaching. How does that fit into this system in the middle school?
Well, in terms of STEM, what I think is that STEM has to be culturally relevant because if you're not teaching technology that is relevant to the time and of the moment, then it's not going to be valued. So right now, the real world situation demands that we are teaching robotics, that we are teaching how to build, we are teaching how to code. But when I was in school, that was not the case. So that was not, those weren't things. So like school has evolved in order to do those things. And I'm sure 15 years from now, it will be completely different because technology adapts like every 7 years or so. So, yeah.
And I think the deeper the design skills, the thinking that's being taught in a class like STEM is important for all students to be getting access to, which goes back to that culturally responsive piece. In some previous times, your top students or your students that didn't need extra help maybe got to go to an elective class like STEM or art or music, and that's when students that needed extra help in their academic area had to go see somebody else for extra help, right? So they weren't exposed to that thinking or those experiences. And so now making sure that all students are exposed is part of the culturally responsive teaching, because you want to build the skills and the capacities that they'd learn in there for when they get to high school and are prepared and ready to take an advanced science class or an advanced coding class or something like that.
Well, one of the things that comes out of this, I think, is you're talking about advanced classes. Where in the system do the kids get to understand what advancement really is? The kind of thing I'm thinking about is classic, if you want to be a doctor, you got to go to medical school. Well, to get to medical school, you have to have a pretty good background in biology,
physics,
that stuff, and also be able to speak Latin. And you're going to go off and continually take courses, eventually do an internship, and pass an exam and get a license. And at the same time, if you want to be a PhD in one of the sciences, that's a different ballgame. You're going off and you're going to have to do research, and you're going to spend 5 to 7 years doing some sort of research project to get your PhD, because that's what a PhD is about. And those are different paths, dramatically different. And the same thing to be a lawyer, it's another ballgame. And somewhere along the line, when do the kids get to the point of somebody telling them, hey, this is what's going on ahead of you? And so you can pick a path that you're going into, and when you're in this path, you have some idea where it's going.
So developing those passions starts in kindergarten, right?
I was going to say the same thing, that it really does start in kindergarten. And
it's all about experiences, exposure, building the skills, so that students can find out what they are passionate about. You know, do they like science? Do they like writing? And then giving them more opportunities when they get to middle school to focus on areas that they're more passionate about. And then when they get to high school, it becomes a little bit more honed in to where they want to spend their time, and then college even more, right? So we start broad with as many experiences as possible, and the further up you go, the narrower it gets.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we did, but when you talk about career paths, we used to wait till students got to the high school to do that, right?
Yeah.
But
not anymore.
no, this past year we brought a Naviance, which is a program at the high school that students can do that helps them to decide what their pathway or their career may be. But we brought it down into the middle school now.
Yeah.
I also think about, when you say this question, I think about this big poster that's on in my classroom where there is a picture of your interest is this and your interest is this, and there's these lines drawn together, and then it brings you to, well, you might want to do this. So there's not necessarily a direct path, but you can bring interests together, and you might find that students don't necessarily know what they want to do. They just know what their interests are, and then they all of a sudden, when you connect them, they can see the path, all the different pathways of things that are possible. So students at middle school level, at least from my experience, they don't know what they could do. They just know what they're interested in.
Well, I think that's part of the game, is that you have an interest, but where does it lead to?
Yeah.
And if you have no idea where you're going,
Yes.
how do you
Right.
get there?
Yep.
Right.
Kind of
There's a
thing.
lot of focus in middle school around careers as well, because students don't necessarily know what things fall under what careers, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
they might like science, but that's a broad category. So what are all of the things? I could do forensics, I could do animal science, I could do plants, I
Yeah.
could do, food technology, and trying to get them to understand all the different opportunities that are out there.
Well, way back when, before COVID hit, used to have this thing at the senior center, breakfast with seniors,
Yeah.
where the seniors from the high school would come over to the senior center and do a home and home series. And got into a couple of discussions with some young ladies over a couple of years who wanted to be veterinarians, okay? And so I asked them the obvious question, why didn't you go to Essex Tech? And one young lady said, well, I didn't want to leave my friends, which is the point you were getting into earlier of how do you move into a new environment and be comfortable getting into a different environment without your social structure behind you.
Yeah.
And the other one blew my mind, which is that I didn't realize you could go to college from Essex Tech. And I think this kind of information is just one of the things in the back of my head of when do you pick this stuff up? And because I know in my own case, I have no idea what I was getting into as an engineer and how far you could go with it. And
Well, that's part of that Naviance program.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
building on Naviance that Dot talked about, we have some counselors in the building that are teaching what we're calling leadership classes, and we're exploring exactly what you're talking about. We're looking at what are their interests, and if you're interested in this, then what are the skills that you need, and tying it into Naviance too. So
And they get information about Essex Tech, and
Yes, they
they take a tour, correct?
some do. Essex Tech people come to the middle school and talk to our students. Our students that are interested in Essex Tech have to go through a pretty elaborate interview process, which I think is fantastic experience for
it's a
them.
tough school to get into. huh?
Yeah,
It is a
it
tough
is.
school to get into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
'Cause they do good work. So.
Oh,
they
yeah.
do.
So I guess the other part of the question is when you're starting to talk about a STEM program. For background, what kind of a license do you have to get to be a STEM teacher is different from a science teacher?
Well,
You're a science teacher that's
I have an
Change your
interesting
label.
past. Actually, I was before even being a math teacher. Before being a STEM teacher, I was an architect for many years, and so you must appreciate this being an engineer.
Oh, yeah.
But then I became a math teacher, and so being a STEM teacher, you can be a math teacher, you can be a science teacher. And I think they even offer STEM teacher positions as well. Like there's degrees in that now.
There's a 55 or 33, I forget which one it is, of the MTELs is technology.
Yes.
And I took a look at that one time just for the heck of it.
Yes.
But so I guess the question is, when you get to these students who have an interest, do you have any opportunity to take them on tours around? Because I know when I was teaching, I used to take my life science class up to New England Biolabs when they were in town, and used to take my physical science class over to Bates Lab, and they would get a tour of that. And they still do tours like this in the school system now?
Well, I think field trips are just starting to come back into the realm, right? They've been out of commission for a couple of years with
Yeah.
COVID. But yeah, when I was a middle school principal, we would send students to different places to take a look at too, or bring people in, as well. So
Well,
that's one of the things we look forward
Excited
to.
to get that
Yeah.
back up and running, for sure.
one of the things that came out of the Plan Beverly was a significant number of people in town, I forget the exact statistic, work in the medical profession. And there's rumors around that New England Biolabs is going to move back into town. This cell signaling has taken over they're expanding. Unfortunately, they're expanding into Manchester, but that's another story. And there's a lot of medical offices and businesses in the Cummings Center. So, like it or not, Beverly is a hotspot of biotech. What kind of a program can you alter in STEM
Well-
to emphasize that or encourage that?
I think at the middle school level, what we try to do is we try to set students up with the skills because we don't actually know what the future job market will be once middle schoolers
It's going to change. We know exactly.
But there's jobs that we don't even know what they will be. So, but we do expose them to robotics. We do expose them to different 3D modeling, Lego building construction. Like we have our Lego Spike Prime, which is brand new. So there's constantly new technology that we're giving these students that open up their experience. And we understand as a school district that these are this is coming, but we also we do think about as eighth graders students need to think about their entire course of studies and what does it mean to be an engineer and making it what is the social impact of that. But not all students will make it to that down that pathway, but they understand that these are important values. But I think a lot of students do understand that engineering will be an important part of their life, whether or not they decide to make it as a career or not. Yes.
I think that the term that keeps coming to mind right now is really critical thinking skills.
Yes.
And that's happening in STEM all the time. I think it's happening across the curriculum. And if at the middle school level we can really teach kids how to think, regardless of their path, I think we're building that foundation for them. And they're exercising it in all their classes. But very much so in STEM.
And that could lead to our future conversation, because the high school has developed pathways, and one of them actually will be a allied health field. And so maybe that will be a future conversation. We can bring the high school in to talk about the pathways they're creating at the high school.
Yeah.
Well, along that line, I think I sent you a copy of a letter about the governor came up with a big grant, I think about $10 million, and a lot of the communities around here got bits and pieces of it. And Peabody and I think it was Swampscott were putting in programs geared mostly towards the medical end of things. And unfortunately, the Salem News didn't cover what Beverly got. Did you ever find out?
I don't, because I didn't know exactly what, we've gotten a lot of grants in the last 2 years, so I didn't know which one specifically you were referring to, but part of the money that we have gotten in from the state and the federal government through the ESSER funding, we are utilizing to look at our Pathways program. We also receive some title grants, and some of that money is going to look at the sciences and business at the high school. And so I think you would see that in the Pathways. We had put in for some space is an issue, as we talked about earlier, also an issue at the high school. So we're thinking about what are additional spaces that we might need, or trying to redesign the way we're using some spaces to allow for more of those types of projects to come in. So again, I think that would be a great conversation with our College and Career Readiness Director and Mrs. Taylor to talk about what's going to happen at the high school, because there's some exciting things happening there.
Well, again, my whole concern is that kids that, I'll back you up, I think if the school should have been 4 through 8, because one of my experiences is that 4th grade kids are asking good questions, and in science and math especially, they need a science and math dedicated teacher to answer. I've gotten called into class in the 5th grade to explain to this kid how this problem is solved, kind of thing. So not something I would denigrate elementary teachers, but they have to cover an awful lot of stuff in this. It's getting to be very complicated, and part of the game of trying to interest kids in science and technology is catch them early, answer their questions early, and that will keep the excitement going.
We're doing a lot of math challenges in the elementary school. We use ST Math, which is a very engaging program to help students build their conceptual thinking around mathematics. Each of our elementary schools also has a math coach who is a math expert that helps to lead model lessons, does all the data collection. We implemented a new math program at the elementary school called Zern. And so we're seeing some pretty good results in our data as it comes to our elementary math programs. Each of the elementary schools also has a STEM teacher.
Yeah.
So they're getting STEM at the elementary school as well.
Yeah. And you talk about Legos, you know, I was thinking in my vintage, it was erector sets.
Ours was Lincoln Logs.
Legos are timeless.
They're timeless,
They only get better.
Great gift.
Yes.
And how to handle the little tiny screws and nuts.
We had the erector set too, but then we also had Lincoln Logs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of this hands-on stuff is important, but at the same time, one of my other bugs is, okay, we're teaching a foreign language. That's nice. I had to go to Spain, Greece, and Turkey and France on different projects. Everything was done in English, except the corner drugstore. So I'm thinking that there ought to be credit in the school system for a program language.
There is.
Yeah.
It's called Seal It by Literacy. We can actually you can get a certificate, and it stays on your degree for being bilingual by the time you graduate.
Does that count against taking the foreign language requirement?
It's part
Part
of
of
the
it, yeah.
part of the foreign language requirement.
You still got to take foreign language.
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if your English is your main language, then you're learning a second language. But that also helps our students that come in fluent in another language, and then they are also learning English.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I understand the ELS, it's a different ballgame yet. And I hate to be Lynn where they had a whole bunch of kids show up that nobody spoke their language. Strange dialect, but that's another problem. But back to this technology business and showing the kids what the pathway looks like. And one of the things that comes out of this thing is if you go off to get a pure science degree, you're not held in as high esteem as if you got a technology degree. Because engineers go to work right out of school. Pure science is clean to test tubes. And pure science means you've got to go all the way on to a PhD if you're going to do some of that stuff. And I mean,
I don't know, I think the last 2 years has changed everybody's mindset around pure science, right? Where we've been without all the scientists as we got through COVID.
that gets to another long discussion.
Yes, it sure does.
And what the games they were playing in the Wunan lab, that gets to be something else. And now we're finding out there's a lab in the Ukraine. What were they doing over there? Russia had some nasty words to say about that, but that's... and again, part of the thing is when the kids see this stuff on television, do they have any clue as to what they're talking about? I mean, how does you take a pure science like 7th or 8th grade life science and expand that to say, well, this is what they're talking about on TV, and this is what it means. And by the way, when you start to talk about wearing masks, well, the particle we're trying to trap is less than 10 microns. How do you trap something that small? I mean, there is real life experience going on now that needs to be explained. And I think middle school is the place to start saying, hey, did you see on TV today? This is what they were talking about. This is what it means.
And that actually does happen in STEM class. We actually address those things and we say what are possible solutions to those problems, because those are real world situations. And we talk about it, and we also try to think of how could we engineer multiple solutions to those problems.
And they have good ideas.
They have really creative solutions. So that's where the math and the science come together.
Yeah, that's where the kids come together, because they don't know what the right answer is.
No.
So they can come up with anything they want.
Yeah.
That's the
Keep
beauty
trying.
of it. Well, once again, we've made our 30 minutes and had fun doing it. And thank you very much for joining us. And like you said, we're going to have some more discussions, because there's a lot more going on that needs to be spread around so everybody knows basically where your tax dollars are going and they're being spent well. And thanks again.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
having us.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And again, at the end of the credits, you'll notice my email address if you've got any comments, and if you want to sit here at the table and expound your thoughts, you're more than welcome. Good evening.